It is my honor and privilege to introduce Raj Yavatkar, my good friend, an amazingly accomplished technologist, and really an all-around great person. I've had the privilege of knowing Raj for almost 3 decades. We first worked together in the early 90s when I was a graduate student, and he was a visiting professor in the same research group at Berkeley. Since then, he has gone on to have an amazing career, focusing on how emerging technologies can be applied to creatively solve business problems. Raj started his career at Intel, where he rose to the position of Intel Fellow. From Intel, he went to VMware, where he led the development and launch of VMware CloudFormation. He left VMware to then lead networking at Google Cloud. He has been awarded more than 45 patents. He's published over 60 research papers, authored 5 internet standards, and also co-authored a book on internet quality of service. Raj is the CTO of Juniper Networks, with responsibility for charting the company's technology strategy. He leads Juniper's critical innovations for its experience-first networks, focused on security, edge and hybrid cloud, and optical integration products. Today, Raj will share his insights on his approach to leading innovation at the edge and at scale. Please join me in welcoming Raj Yavatkar.
Thank you, Amit. So let me share my screen and start with the slides. But I want to thank you, Amit and Nidhi and Dipti and all the organizers for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to follow my classmate and friend Jay, who is an accomplished innovator. So it's interesting that I'm going to talk about innovation at scale. But let me state that what I would like to talk about is innovating at edge and scale at a traditional companies, established companies. What are the challenges? What are the opportunities? And that's the purpose of this talk. So let's jump into it. One of my all-time favorite leaders, strategic thinkers, an amazing person was Andy Grove. He was a CEO and chairman of Intel when I was there. And he used to have an approach to innovation that always stuck in my mind. His quote, I still remember, he used to say, let chaos reign, then reign in chaos. So he would let multiple teams in parallel go off and start exploring new areas. And after about 12 to 18 months, he will bring them back and decide what will be pursued, what will be killed. Because, he used to be very clear about the fact that just because he's CEO, he does not know what the future holds. But he was also very paranoid about things getting disrupted by competitors. So approach was let the innovation happen at any speed and it can happen, but then try to control it later on with respect to investments and so on. So why am I here? I think we are in the middle of Silicon Valley, mecca of technology innovation, right? There's so many startups that come out every day. They disrupt the ecosystem. I think the purpose of my presentation is really to focus on if you're working in a medium to large established company and you're trying to innovate, what are the opportunities? How do you go about doing that? What are the challenges? That's what I'm going to focus on. And that's why I started out with Andy's famous quote. So let me start from describing the different types of innovations that happen, right? One of the innovation that's well understood, and that's what the Silicon Valley is made up of, is what is known as disrupting from below, which is actually very well described in Clayton Christensen's book, Innovator's Dilemma. He has done case studies after case studies. Even outside his book, he has done that to see how the traditional, well-established companies get disrupted from below in the sense that you come up with a product which is good enough, which is simpler and cheaper, and that you provide as an alternative to the traditionally established product ecosystem. Example, he starts out with hard drives, how they got replaced with floppy disks, which are really barely good enough, but that led to flash memory and all that innovation happened. So an example of how established ecosystem can get disrupted. Another example that we all know about is in computing as well as networking. Companies like Intel, Facebook started open computing initiative about 10, 15 years back. And that basically said that the server is the server. Why do I have to pay so much to a traditional server vendor like HP, Compaq, Lenovo, IBM, Dell, and so on? Why not simply have a standard design architecture done by Intel and Facebook together, give it to any original device manufacturers in Taiwan who are already manufacturing for established companies. And those servers will cost you somewhere like 30 to 40% cheaper. They do the same job, and software is where the differentiation is. And that has led to lots of white boxes today. And people end up using that in computing and networking. Shared economy apps that we all use to order grocery, food, or get rides, and also an example of disruption from below, because they established an existing ecosystem offering something which is good enough, simpler and cheaper. And I think there's another example today I would like to give, which is happening today with the cellular networks. We all use cell phones. We see those sticking out antennas and towers everywhere. And at the base of that antenna is typically a base station, which is where the signals get transmitted to IP packets, they get routed from there. And traditionally, those base stations are given by companies like Nokia, Ericsson, Huawei as vertically integrated boxes, very expensive, if not tens of thousands of dollars, sometimes $100,000, depending on the size of the box, size of the deployment. But a few years back, I think people at Intel said that x86 has an advantage, right? If you use Intel x86 processors, software ecosystem is very widely used. It's available everywhere. Anybody can write software for it, can start shipping it because it's a standard platform. So why not take that and apply it to this particular function, even though it involves doing some radio signal processing and so on. That led to something called virtualized self-site router based on x86 platform, use containerized applications, and the cost of such a box is 1/10 or even less than the traditional box. This is a classic example of disruption from below. And the reason I'm bringing up this example is that you have to watch out for that. Any company has to watch out from being disrupted by another company by coming up from below. Another kind of innovation that I always like to point out is that you cannot plan for innovation and success. Sometimes serendipity itself gives you amazing results. And I'm going to give one concrete example. Today, if you are in networking, you know that there's something called DPDK library. This is data plane development kit. This is a C and C++ libraries used for user planes packet processing. Normally, the packet processing was done in Linux kernel, which is hard to modify and ship, or in ASICs, in switches and routers. This particular library says push all of the packet processing simply as an application using libraries, so that packet coming at an end system client or server directly gets delivered into user space. How did it come about? It's an interesting story I want to share. In about 2005, until then, I was leading a team of small architects. We have invented a new product category called IXP, Programmable Network Processors. And after the dot-com bust, our customers kept on disappearing. Nortel went away, Alcatel and merge, all that stuff. So Intel decided to sell that business on. So we are networking people, and suddenly we have nothing else to do. So one of my team members, Santosh Balakrishnan, came to me and said he would like to write a library to start doing packet processing using x86 instructions, but in user space. And I had no idea what he was talking about, really, because I said, that seems very hard. We do everything in kernel, efficiency, performance, power, and all that. But I said, okay, you go ahead. Here, and another engineer, Venki Venkatesh, went off and started developing that. And there's no specific vision. We can't take credit that we had this great strategy or vision, nothing like that. But what they ended up doing caught fire, because once they make the library available, everybody started using that for adding new firewall, new load balancer, anything that was traditionally done in kernel. Suddenly you could, in user space, ship it as application. And today it's the largest ecosystem of networking developers, including hyperscalers are using that. Could we have planned for that? I don't think so. So that's an example where serendipity, if allowed, serendipity will lead to some amazing results. And I have multiple examples of that. So then now come to innovation part about what are the challenges and how do you go about encouraging or bringing about innovation in any traditional company. So one of the challenges is that people want to start moving forward. If you want to retain your smart engineers, retain your smart product management people, you want to give them opportunity. So the way to go about doing that, in my opinion, is that you start investing small and do it quickly. Quickly in the sense that you are willing to fail fast, right? You say, I'm going to fund something that will have a certain amount of investment and a certain timeline by which will be reevaluated and decide whether you want to continue that or not. As a technologist, one of the things I learned in a really hard way is that it's not enough to have good ideas and start to develop them. In a large company, you have to also sell in those ideas. In your other peer functions like go-to-market, sales, marketing, corporate strategy. Why? Because those people would otherwise would resist good ideas because those are not coming from there. But if you make them your partners and start selling in ideas, you build an ecosystem of support. When you have to make the idea bigger and get bigger investment, you are able to move forward. Finally, I think you have to be ready to understand that you cannot plan for success. You have to be ready to fail and take a consequence. Whatever the outcome comes, you have to be ready to accept it. So because you can't really plan that any innovation idea you're going to pursue is going to succeed. The other thing, what happened here? Okay. My signal.
You can see your slides. We can see you. You're good.
Yeah, you can see, right? I think.
Yeah, please keep going.
So, yeah, I just want to, I think I could not forward it. Sorry. So I think that what has worked is what a couple of examples I want to give. One is that always in a company, if you innovate at the edge, by edge, I mean you have certain product categories and segment. If you start innovating just to expand the envelope of existing products. So if you're a network security company doing firewalls, you might decide to get into load balancers because there's some common characteristics in terms of what you end up doing with packet processing, network processing. So adjacent to current products, it's easier to explore than completely unknown, which is innovation for disruption. You have to push the envelope as much as possible by expanding the boundary, but always pick a focus area and decide how much you're willing to invest. That's important to do. So that always I have seen worked in many companies. Many companies grow doing that. What is harder to do is the disrupting your existing business. Because disrupting yourself before someone else does is very hard, but it's important to do. Andy Grove used to say that disrupt yourself before somebody else does, because people are afraid to cannibalize existing product line. If you're a CEO of a company, you're responsible to the Wall Street. You have to give quarterly results, predictions. And if you have 30-40% market share in a particular product category, you do not want to disrupt it. But if you don't disrupt yourself, some other startup will come from below and disrupt you and take the market share of it. So what you do for that is that use a very different process. You isolate the team and investment in a completely different area of the company, free them up from all the usual processes of finance, HR, and so on. So they have freedom to act like a startup. Let them break the rules with respect to, who do they go out and partner with, which external entities they engage with, even though many times in the company there are strict rules about that because of competition and so on. And finally, you put a tight leash on that by asking them to produce a minimum viable demo first, not minimum viable product. MVP is something that you can develop in 6 to 9, 12 months, take it to customers and start testing out the ideas. And all of this you can accomplish with a small investment. So that I have seen worked again and again. The product I ended up developing at VMware called VMware Cloud Foundation, which is more than $1 billion in revenue today, was done using this particular model. I was given 4 people first, then 14 people eventually, and ultimately it grew bigger, but we were able to do minimum viable demo, take it to the customers and prove out the idea. That always works in my opinion. Finally, how do you innovate at scale? Because the examples I gave are incremental innovation at edge or innovation like using a startup approach. But you also want a function to innovate at scale. And that requires the company to have an advanced R&D function like a lab, Intel Labs, HP Labs, Google just started a systems research lab and so on. Those people have a different charter. They are only asked to explore new areas, new boundaries. You start them with engineers and business development people whose job is innovation and they're comfortable with that. So business development people are necessary because they will try out the ideas from business perspective. Engineers will explore new ideas by developing prototypes and so on. And you have to make those people comfortable with uncertainty because many times you're going to get success in 20 to 40% of the time. And 60% of the ideas, you'll have to shelve them or simply kill them. And people have to be comfortable with that level of uncertainty. So what you end up doing, you create a separate charter in the company, give them guidelines for how to do Horizon 2 and Horizon 3 initiatives. Horizon 2 is beyond the current product line. Horizon 3 is completely. Looking at optical networking is an example of Horizon 3 if you're doing packet switching. And you do adjustments as the projects evolve, ideas are tested, people develop prototypes, take them out, show them out, and so on. So that's a third aspect of how you do innovation. Innovation at edge, innovation for disrupting from below, and innovation at scale. So the key takeaways from this presentation I want to give you is that, first of all, plan for failures, not just success. That's something if you don't do, then people get very disappointed. If somebody is going down the exploration of innovation, make them sure that they understand they're going to fail. And likely failure is likely, but that's okay. Serendipity is okay. I gave an example why it is okay, because many times you cannot plan for success and necessarily start with a vision. And always prefer innovation that pushes the boundary of current products. And finally, allow disruption from below using a very different model, which is a startup within a company like a model. With that, I think I've taken enough of your time. Thank you, and open for questions.
Thank you, Raj. That was a really insightful presentation with lots and lots of ideas for us to work with. Especially like the idea of bringing in and getting the support from the sales and the marketing teams. That's critical for the long success. It's clear that this is not just book knowledge. You lived through this and you've thought through this and thought to understand what it takes. There are a couple of questions. So first is, you talked about Innovator's Dilemma. The book is 25 years old now. Yes. Yet disruptions continue and existing companies keep getting disrupted. Why is that even when all this knowledge is available, these big companies still keep getting disrupted?
I think I give to this Wall Street mentality creates a short-term focus. So if you're a CEO, or I look at my peers also, there's a sharp focus is how do they make next quarter's, next year's numbers. When you do that, you tend to develop blindfolds, right? You only look at that. And no matter how much strategic thinking analysis happen, people end up making that mistake. I think that's where I think the leaders who are visionaries and strong leaders have to allow for innovation to happen inside the company rather than getting disrupted. So I always like to say, right, disrupt yourself before somebody else disrupts you. And that's hard to do, but I think you have a plan for it.
Thank you. And that's a great example of thinking from the top down. The other question that I was asked is, at the lower levels of the organization, how do you make sure that you bring everybody along, and how do you align the incentives so that all the people work towards the same goal to avoid the companies getting disrupted?
Yeah, I think that's a hard question because, many engineers I have had that experience in many companies where engineers will ask me, if I work on this and this fails, I won't get promoted. Because, many times you have people get rewarded when something product ships or something like that happens. So you have to be very careful in creating that structure in which you will allow for people to be rewarded. And I want to give an example of Andy Grove because it's really a role model for me. He used to allow for these kind of things to happen, but then he used to promote people even if he canceled the project. If they delivered something which was important, IP was developed and so on. That sort of thing sets the tone that people know that they are not sacrificing that career by going down this path.
Thank you, Raj. That was amazing and really, really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Thanks.
Thank you, Amit and Raj. Yes, we have innovation down, but thank you, Raj, for also showing us how to go beyond just talking about it and how we can actually do something about it.